Good morning, evening, or afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion on connecting the dots between well-being, mental health, and employee experience. I'm Rod Hutchings, coming from Melbourne, Australia, and I'm the moderator today, and really looking forward to a great conversation. We've got some great experts here to join us today, and really in this rapidly changing work, this whole hybrid work, the importance of fostering mental health and well-being has never been any more critical. So I'm really looking forward for us to really unpack what all that means. So if we can bring forward our panelists, please. Wow. And I'm imagining it's going to be good morning for you, but yeah. So if we can start, we'll start the conversation. If you can just introduce yourself and just share your very briefly, I guess, your perspective on the current state of mental health well-being and why it's crucial to connect the dots with employee experience. And if we'll go around clockwise, so we'll start with Angelique.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Angelique Hamilton. I'm the founder and CEO of the HR Chic Group, which is a human resources and culture consultancy. My perspective of the current state of mental health is that it's at a critical state in terms of not only the work world, but just the world that we live in. So it's so important to really connect the dots because this really determines your overall well-being for your employees and also not only their experience at your workplace, but how they actually perform. So for me, it's truly important that we focus on that.
Right. And welcome, Melissa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Schwartzman. I'm an HR executive, but also a mental health licensed counselor. So this topic's really important for me on both perspectives. And I would agree with Angelique. I think we're at a critical state. I think mental health affects everyone, but in varying degrees. So I think we need to look at this from the perspective employees bring their whole self to work. So we cannot ignore that that's happening. So we need to look at how we're going to be able to recognize what's going on for people at work and then provide for them the best programming and practices that we can to help them have the best experience. And also, I think mental health is becoming more of an awareness for everybody. So it's not as much of that taboo topic. It's front and center.
Thanks. And Ashley, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. So I'm the CEO of Structured Design Group, DE&I consulting firm here in the state of Maryland in the United States. So it's a pleasure to be with you all as well as the panelists. I've seen some of you all in other spaces. So to answer your question, Rod, I really appreciate that. But I agree with my colleagues here that it is very crucial. But we're seeing a divide of mental health in various ways. There's a lot of stigma about mental health. What does it actually mean to us and individualized? But then we always talk about it's okay to not be okay in the workspace, but what does that truly mean? It's okay to not be okay. But we're seeing a divide when it talks about gender or when we kind of identify or give it an identity. You're starting to see that now and play out on various platforms. Women are focused more on their mental health. You see more women coming to the forefront, but it's mental health for men right now. And we're not seeing any campaigns, any dialogue to support men or non-binary, especially for Pride. You're seeing a lot of celebrations, but let's talk about the mental health and well-being of folks in the LGBT plus community, as well as Juneteenth is today in the United States. So there's so many different avenues of how we can intersect that. And that's why it is crucial, but it's also, you see a divide in that space. So I'm hoping we can tackle that in this conversation today to really deep dive on how do we kind of move the dial a little bit more to be more inclusive, but give a great employee experience in the workplace.
I'm really glad you brought that up because that was almost going to be my next question relating to that topic. So we'll start unpacking it very quickly, I think. So thanks, Ashley, and welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. I am somehow even more excited for this conversation after all of these amazing introductions. Thank you all so much. I'm Stephanie Lemick. I'm a former HR executive and founder and CEO of the Wounded Workforce. We're an organization dedicated to building trauma-informed workplaces. And I think all of my colleagues have made Amazing points. And because I need to be brief, I will sum it up quickly as I think we are in a dire state when we are honest with ourselves about the state of mental health in the workplace and in our society overall. But I also think we're in a hopeful place and that we are in a space where there is an opportunity to make real change not only to our workplaces, but also to our overall communities as we relate to mental health.
Thanks, Stephanie. And I should just add a bit more about myself as well before we get into it. Is that so? I'm in the Royal Australian Air Force in the military. Mental health is a massive thing in Australia with the military. We've had we've actually ongoing. We've got a Royal Commission into mental health and how the military can tackle improving mental health for the Air Force, Army, and Navy. So it's a really big topic here. All right. So my first question now to get us going is to start to unpack, I think, a little bit of what Ashley brought up, and that's sort of, how, and so I'll come to you first, Ashley, since you brought it up, is how can organizations effectively promote mental health and well-being initiatives and being inclusive for everybody? So, from those, particularly from underrepresented and marginal groups, but can be other groups as well. I mean, you mentioned a number of them, in your introduction. So let's get unpacking. So over to you,
Absolutely.
Ashley.
Thank you so much for the question. And I'm definitely going to leave space for my colleagues to chime in here. So the first step is learning. Everybody has to be receptive to learning. And it comes from our leadership, making sure that it's announced and known that we're going to focus on mental health and well-being. This is important to the business, establishing that and how important it is for our leaders to take the initiative, but take action as well. Be a part of those conversations. And in that learning space, the first step is to break the stigma. What is mental health? What does well-being actually mean? What does that look like in different spaces? Then you're creating that space of safety where people feel comfortable in having these spaces. And folks are not going to be willing to do that off the bat. So that learning journey is learning and making sure you have the right people in place to help establish that safe space of learning, but then also the right people to be willing to have those conversations, especially when it comes to the different diasporas or identities that people kind of are representing themselves. When we say bring your whole self to work, what does that really mean? If I'm, someone who has ADHD, but then I have a boss who really wants us to be high functioning and I can't, connect the dots. It's hard for me. I may take a little bit more time. How does that manager know? How can I feel comfortable to let that manager know? So those are some things that's one of the main things. I know there's plenty more, and I want to leave space for my colleagues to interject here and add more layers. But the first and vital step is learning for just the leaders, but then also the organization, so they know how they're going to support as an organization in this journey.
Ashley said it so perfectly. And, a lot of how I got started on the journey I am currently is around the intersection of mental health and the mental health crisis. For a lot of individuals, the mental health crisis really for white men and the intersection of DE&I. And I think a lot of times we think of these as two separate things, and we should certainly fund them as two separate things. Let's make that very clear. But these DE&I efforts, intersectional efforts in the workplace, and mental health efforts in the workplace are about creating space for people to show up as their full selves, for people to bring themselves to work. And a lot of times, an analogy I like to use when we talk about mental health is, each of us has a suitcase that we're bringing with us to work. And that suitcase is why we're hired. It has all of our knowledge, skills, abilities, previous experience. It also has all of our lived experiences. And for many individuals, those are aspects of mental health challenges, theirs or those around them. And it also are all of those lived experiences around race, religion, gender, historical trauma. And so when we look at it from that perspective and we create the space to understand we all have this unique suitcase how can we better appreciate everyone, and then really partner mental health efforts with DE&I efforts. I think that's where we really have this amazing opportunity to actually create a workplace that works for everyone.
I agree with everything that's being said. I think it's really important, though, to get the commitment from holistically, from the leadership, from the top down, and I think from the bottom up, right, and the middle level in between. And what I mean by that is a lot of times people say, this sounds great, we're going to do it, but they don't do it in a consistent way across all programs, across all conversations. So I think education and awareness is really the key here to make sure we're doing it in all areas. So if you're implementing a DE&I initiative, but you're doing lots of training, well, okay, we went to the classroom, but what are we doing to make sure we're threading it through all the way? Are we having deeper conversations, how we're applying it within our teams? What do our performance reviews look like? Are they reflecting that? How are we making sure that we're doing it also in sort of our values, right? We have our company values and our culture. How is that being impacted? So I think education and knowledge is so critical. And I think we have to look at, as we talked about breaking down some of these stigmas. Some people are very private about their mental health and also from their cultures that they come from. This is a cultural aspect of them as a person. So I think it's really important that organizations give the opportunity for public education and training and awareness by programming. And of course, not just during Mental Health Month, right? A lot of organizations really plug it then. This should be done all the time. And then I think we have that public opportunity where there's opportunities to, attend a wellness program that might be offered. A lot of the healthcare companies now are doing things. So we need to promote what's offered through the benefits programming. But I think also making sure there's private opportunities, reminding that companies that offer those employee assistance programs or whatever any other options there are for people to be heard. So education, training, knowledge, and consistency with messaging.
Some great answers here, and I think, I mean, exactly what you've said, all around education, understanding, both from a leader's point of view, both from an individual's point of view, is so critical. Anyone else want to add to this before we move on, Angelique?
Yeah, I would definitely concur with my colleagues here. There definitely has to be buy-in from the top. If employees do not see that, they are not comfortable sharing their true and full self. So they're bringing this false version of who they are to the organization. And I agree with the whole promotion. The only time we seem to hear about mental health is during mental health awareness. It should not be a one-time promotion. It should be embedded in the culture with your values, with your operational goals, and focusing on the overall perspective of the employee.
Yeah. Yeah. And in a way, I think what you're alluding to is what's really critical is having that psychological safety that you can speak up, and doing so is you're going to, be safe in doing that. And it's a valid thing to do. And one of the key things, having that safety, is receiving the message as well. So you might be safe in sharing it, but how do you respond? How do you actually hear and listen what was said? And that's sort of what I'll dive into now. And what got me into really being focused on mental health is I had a very close cousin commit suicide 5 years ago. And so my next question is going to be, in a way, related to my personal experience that's got me into being educated better. I still need to learn more, and so I like these conversations. And so one of the things, identifying, I think, stress or challenge with people when you're remote, even when you're together, it can be challenging, but particularly with remote, because that lack of physical distance. How do you, and really today we've got so many employees still working in a remote, or it can be hybrid. So it's really important that we develop strategies to be able to detect issues as well as someone listening, and that's whether you're a co-worker, a manager, how do you detect that there's stress, there's concern, to provide timely support? So I'll pick on Melissa, and what are your thoughts on how organisations can effectively help ensure that that they're organised, again, like whether it's managers, each other can detect when there's signs of stress in employees. What tools, methods have you found useful in your experience?
Absolutely. I think it's really important. Most organizations have manager training, right? That includes how do you go from being an individual contributor to a manager. But I think it's really important to think about including things that managers need to look for their employees if there's change in behaviors and change in work performance. So to go further than that, right, with the remote environment, right, we're trying to have these high performing teams striving for cohesion. I think it's important that managers have that training and understanding so they can kind of drive this. So when we're having team meetings, we all get very set on, we have these business initiatives, we have these actions, what are we doing for deliverables? I think it's important that managers take some time to have the people on the team, whether it's the individual team or these cross-functional teams that are happening, that people know each other not only from their work identity, what are you doing to have the strategy driven, but who are you as a person? Like what's going on with you? What's happening? Because then people feel more connected and they're going to be for more. So then if somebody's, maybe there was a death in their family or more, somebody's going through a divorce, like people are going to be aware that maybe some of these things are happening and somebody maybe can be more supportive. A manager can be more aware. It's not just when it gets too late where somebody's now on a full-on performance improvement plan, maybe being managed out. We all were kind of here together as a community working together. So I think it's important that managers are trained on things to look at, but not only managers, but fellow coworkers. Like what should we be looking for? Like the things that are not, if, Sally's now doing this or Jim's doing this, like what are things we should be looking for if somebody used to be participating, now they're not. I think we should give people tools to help them understand if they're not, used to, understanding what makes people healthy and happy holistically.
Thanks, Leslie. Great points. Who would like to add on to that?
Go ahead, Angelique.
Yeah, I would say, in the case of, looking for those clues, it's important for the manager to have that direct connection, even during their one-on-ones, to really focus on, how are you doing? Are you over capacity with your work? I think managers volunteer people, they voluntold, people, some of their assignments. And so the employee feels stressed out and they're not going to share that they're over capacity. So building out that capacity for your employees, really looking at where are they in terms of their work, how you can support them, how can their colleagues support them, and just look for those clues when they start to disconnect from meetings. They're no longer participating, or you're seeing delays in work, or they feel very overextended. That's the time to have that discussion to see how you can provide those resources to support the individual. And there's also mental health first aid training that's available that you can offer to your staff, so they can also look for those cues and look for those keys and to determine whether or not this person does need that support.
Yeah, that's some great additions there, for sure.
I love that you brought up mental health first aid. I have my little algae, my mental health first aid bear. It originated in Australia, Rod. I'm sure you know that. But mental health
Yep.
first aid is an awesome resource. So huge fan of that. I also want to add, when we talk about mental health and kind of mental health interventions in the workplace, it's scary. It's scary thinking about, oh my goodness, I think my employee, my peer, someone I care about in the workplace might be having a mental health challenge. And to quickly offer kind of two things, remember, you don't have to do this alone. Remember, if you think, a peer employee is having a hard time, tap in your resources as a manager, as a leader, as an employee to help, and to help get the right resources to that individual. And also, it can feel like a lot to try and figure out the right thing to say. I think we've all had those moments in our life where we're like, I don't know what the right thing to say is. Hey, how are you doing? Or are you okay? Those work. And those are great ways to have and start that conversation. Absolutely invest in relationships, get to know your team members because those are going to be more impactful, but also know that you have that power to say, hey, are you okay? And then tap your resources. If nothing else, if you don't have mental health first aid training, or you're not sure what to do or what resources to offer, you can always tap someone in and get that additional help and make sure someone's okay.
I think that's really good advice, Stephanie. I think that's one of the challenges is also, having the courage. Like if you get the sense that there might be something that's not okay, just knowing how do I deal with that? Like how do I not just brush it aside and try and change the topic? How do I listen better? How do I explore that? I think that's where education is so critical, and certainly the education you get through mental health first aids. And that's what I did. So my experience, like as I mentioned before, it was 5 years ago, and I literally did become a mental health first aider because, like I had engagements with my cousin, and I probably, I think like when I reflect on it, I think that I could have asked other things. So but that's just a very difficult lesson, but it's one that that's a real critical one, I think. All right. So we might move on then. So I guess creating a culture where, and I think we've already covered this, we brought up the topic, a culture where employees feel comfortable discussing mental health openly is crucial. Like that's what we're, I guess, talking about. So what's critical is really reducing stigma, encouraging support-seeking sort of behavior. So I'll come to you first, Stephanie, on this one, and that's, what strategies have been successful in your experience about creating this culture where employees feel comfortable discussing mental health challenges openly and seeking support without fear of stigma or discrimination?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think we won't go down this rabbit hole, but I'm assuming with a lot of HR professionals on this call, culture is always a hot topic. And for most of us, we know culture is not about what you write on your website. Culture is not about the core values that get posted and then ignored the rest of the year. Culture is really about the everyday experience that your teams have every single day. What is that like? And I think that's such an important point to make when we talk about mental health, because we're often talking about mental health as programs, additional things, mental health month initiatives. And really, when we want to talk about that true impact around mental health in the workplace, the greatest impact we can have is ingraining it in the culture and making it part of the day to day. And I love the way you frame this question, Rod, because reducing stigma is a huge part of successfully addressing and creating a culture of mental health. The number one thing I would say, this is a hot button of mine, is everyone has mental health. Just like everyone has physical health, we all have mental health. A lot of times when we talk about mental health, we speak to challenges. But the truth is, we all have mental health, and there are always proactive things we can do to address that. And I think framing mental health in that way is a fantastic way to start to reduce the stigma and increase conversations. A quick two other things that I think of when I think about, reducing stigma and creating culture of mental health. I do a lot of work actually in the construction industry, which may be surprising as you think about, progressive. But actually, unfortunately, the construction industry has one of the highest suicide rates of any industry. It is a crisis. And one thing that can be really helpful especially for individuals who are not comfortable seeking help, is making resources very available and framing resources as a way to support others. So it's like,
Mm.
hey, maybe you don't need this, but it'd be great if you had it available in case, your son or daughter, a family member, another coworker might need a resource. So take these resources and keep them in your wallet. That way, we haven't quite gotten to the point of reducing the stigma, but we're still getting the resources out there in a way that they're available. And lastly, this is one that I did personally. And I started doing this during COVID, and it was a remote environment. We all remember there was just a lot of crap going on that really sucked. I don't know how else to say it. And there were these moments where things would happen, and I just did not know how to go on with my day in the news. And I very openly and clearly said to my team members, to other leaders, this thing just happened and I am not okay with it. I need to take a beat. I need to take a break. I'll come back, online tomorrow, or I'll come back online when I'm in the right headspace. And I made it very clear to my teams that that same was for them. And that gets to the, moments where something is happening and we can't ignore it and we just need to take a moment, whether it's something in the public or it's personal. And I think a real successful for me as a leader is when members of my team said, hey, I'm having a hard time today. Can I jump offline? And you say, yes. Is there anything you need from me? Like, take whatever time you need. Just creating that space. And if you're comfortable with it, being vulnerable and sharing your own, like, hey, I need to take a beat, even if you're not ready to share your own challenges, I think leading in that way is really powerful and again impacts that day-to-day experience.
Stephanie, I think that's so important because we think about what we say about having all this work-life balance, right? And leading by example. But this is how we could get it back into the culture. So if leaders that people like we were pointing out before, other colleagues had said, if the leaders find it to be okay, then it's going to be okay and people will be far more safe coming forward. So I think if that becomes the culture, where we're taking that extension of this work-life balance. Listen, we all realize life is happening while we're at work. We are all have real experiences. So if that's kind of a thing, like I'm having something that's happening today, so I'm going to need to take a break from this. So it's the same as almost that I need to go to the softball game that my kid's having. Like I need to take a break because I'm having something happening. That's where the culture happens, right? And promoting these things as part of the culture. And I like what you said, Stephanie, about the mental health, right? Because we promote a lot of things about the physical health, but the physical health is also part of your mental health. So making sure that this balance is complete, right? That we are leading it, taking it through your whole self and make it more normalized for people to do that.
Thanks,
If I
Melissa.
can, I would like to add a layer to that. I know we're talking more about
Yeah.
like the signs of, the bad things when people are not showing up or productivity is low, but it also happens in reverse. It's when those who are actually high functioning, always at work, always online, willing to step into multiple projects. It's those things as well that affect mental health. And those people need to be checked on as well. So sometimes it's your top performers that are experiencing mental health concerns, or maybe some things that might flash a light bulb. So I just want the audience to kind of realize that there's different spectrums to going by what Stephanie was saying. It's in all of us, and it can happen in different formats. It's not just because someone's productivity is low. Someone's productivity is always high. And that can be in cause of like a toxic workspace where managers are constantly thinking about the numbers to produce, or micromanaging to making sure that you're always green online or always constantly available. That then turns into, I can't take off at work. I always have to have my phone with me or always online. I can't even go to the bathroom because I have so many meetings back to forth. I had to show up every day. You have to look a certain way every day. It's those things that we have to educate not only our managers, but our teammates too. What are some things that we're just doing just as a habit every day that we do that causes that type of stress and anxiety in all our people, whether you're a top performer or you have something going on in your life? And that just resonates back to just making people more aware and learning what does that look like, but also holding people accountable. When we talk about culture, yes, we're going to make this part of our business, but how are we holding managers accountable to do so? How do we see that? We see that in our annual surveys. What does their performance look like? Are they doing check-ins? How are we holding these managers accountable to not just say, oh yeah, I'm doing it, I'm making sure that they're green every day? That's a sign of micromanaging. That causes stress within your team. So those are the things that us as HR professionals need to educate not only the business, but also these leaders or aspiring leaders, these small microaggressions that occur each and every day. Oh, you're taking another break again. It's those types of things. Oh, here comes we got a big holiday coming up. We know no one's going to show up. It's those little small little innuendos that create stress and anxiety amongst us as humans. And we have to be mindful that just ties back into just learning. But I wanted to add another side of that coin in this dialogue today, that it always not that negative cue. Is some of these small cues or positive cues that happen that we think are positive are really detrimental to the people that are in that environment or ecosystem.
Some really great points there, Ashley. And I think that I think you're absolutely right that everything can't always be green. And I think a good place where I like getting analogies from is sport. And you may have heard last week Roger Federer spoke at a university, and one of the things he spoke about was that yes, he won 80% of his games that he played in, but he actually only won 54% of the points. So he actually, he lost plenty. But the thing what enabled him to win the games, was really about just having that expectation that you're not going to win every moment of time, and that's okay. So he really needed to be able to continue to be able to have the confidence, not to be in a fear state, to be in a state where you can be relaxed and you can perform your best. And that's the same sort of expectations, I guess, that just needs to be clear at work. Everything's not always perfect. And if we strive for perfection, we're always trying to get there. And that can be a limiting factor, I think. All right. So we'll move on. And I think another key thing is a sense of belonging, I think, is really quite critical in whatever groups you're in, and certainly vital for being at work with mental health. And particularly with there's diverse teams from many different perspectives. Diversity, can be from age, location, different experiences people bring to work. So on that note, then I'll come to Angelique first. In what ways can leaders foster a sense of belonging with diverse teams, especially considering, the different intersections of identities and experiences that may impact mental health and well-being?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a loaded question as well. One of the things I think as leaders, we tend to focus what happens within the four walls. There are things that happen outside of the four walls, and trying to really embrace those activities that our employees are facing. I definitely believe in having a regular cadence of a touch point with your staff. If you're only reaching out to your staff members once a month, you really don't know your team. And also not only just focusing on the work at hand, but also focusing on that whole person. How are you, starting those meetings, how are you today? How's the work going? And really trying to integrate not only the work, but also what's happening outside of the work externally with your employees. Offering an open door with open door communication. We say that all the time, and all of my HR peers, we know that's always a policy, but truly, is it? there are occasions where there are leaders who have, if you're in a physical space where the door is always closed, if you're virtual, your manager is unavailable. So is it truly an open door communication with your team? So fostering a very open environment, being truly receptive of what's happening to them personally, and also taking in consideration what they're actually bringing into the organization and also into that work environment. As my peers stated earlier, our culture within the work environment is not a state of mind or just a period of point. It is actually an everyday occurrence. So how you're operating on a daily basis with your team members, just to ensure that they feel comfortable in sharing what's happening with them, that they feel comfortable in even connecting with their peers. What we're facing now within the work environment, there are silos. Even though we're virtually connected, people work independently. They may never meet the individuals that they work with across the globe or across the states. But what's happening is the longer that we work together, the further we're driving ourselves apart. So really building an open work environment, presenting and also promoting collaboration, and also cross-functional collaboration with your team members, and just being receptive so we can break the stigma of how people are really operating within the 9 to 5 or the business and work environment.
I love what Angelique said, and I would add, I must be on a let's make this easy kick this morning, which that very rarely happens. So let's take advantage. The workplace is actually this really amazing place. I mean, think about it. This is one of the few places where very different people still get together and do amazing things. And there's some magic there around that. And I think there's a lot of really hard things. And you know, who hasn't been part of an organization that wants everyone who works together to be best friends and go to happy hour and all the things? And that's not for everyone, and that's okay. I think don't ignore the fact that leveraging here is this team and we are working together on this common goal is an amazing way to drive connection. And connection as a team member, as someone working towards the same goal, is still real and important connection. And focusing in on that and allowing space, creating the space for those additional connections, for people to talk about similarities or talk about their personal lives if they're comfortable, I think is really powerful. So focus on, here is this thing that is actually what we're all working towards and how we can connect on that, how we can collaborate, and then create space for connection instead of forcing connection, which I think sometimes we get a little bit wrong. I think that that's a powerful way to really, create a sense of community or peer support, which is something we talk a lot about when we talk about a trauma-informed space, because those connections of people who've been through stuff we're going through are really powerful. So even if you're not sure, oh my gosh, I don't know how to get this team together, I don't know enough about folks personally, or we've got, George and he only wants to talk about work, that's okay. You can still drive connection through that sense of that shared purpose, that common goal.
That's a really good addition, Stephanie, and I'll come on top of that in that last week, 2 weeks ago, I was coaching in volleyball. So I'm coming back to sport again, a volleyball team in a national tournament, and I had challenges with some people being concerned they weren't getting enough game time. And so a key thing to bring the team back to firstly was, again, that point that you made around, what's our purpose here? What are we trying to do? Let's all buy into that, making sure that people then understood their roles. What's the best way for us to do that? And really talk about that as a group. And then also, I had to have one-on-one conversations with people as well, just to make sure that they were aligned to that. But it did help the individuals that weren't getting as much game time when they really bought into, here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to win. We end up winning the bronze medal. So it was a good outcome in the end, and they were all very satisfied with that. But that was a critical part. Just managing expectations was a key thing. All right. So moving on to, I guess, resilience. So building resilience is crucial for getting people to cope with stress, adversity. And so I'm wondering, Ashley, so what sort of strategies can organizations implement to build resilience among their employees, help them cope better when things are stressful, or adversity, which is just, it should be, again, expected. You're always going to have those times.
Absolutely. I think it's a great question. And I think you've kind of set us up to have this great, hopefully some great answers coming from all of us here. But I want to start by managing expectations is what you said. That's the first thing. Where do you want to go? What is the ultimate desired outcome? And that needs to be defined. It cannot be defined by HR. It needs to be defined at all players at the table for the organization. What do we ultimately want for our organization to stand for? What do we want our employees to be like? What do we ultimately want to do in order to drive the business forward? That's where you have to manage expectations, because it's not going to come by creating these different programs, these different benefits, and just expect people to take advantage of those, because one, they're not. Because if you don't have your management team and staff prepared on the long-term goal of your strategy, of your efforts, your initiative, if they're not on board, your whole desired outcome and expectations are going to fail. That's just the reality of it, because employees are smart. I don't care who you think, they're smart. They can read fluff. They know when you're BSing them. They know when you're telling the truth and when you're not. Let's just call it what it is. Whether they're just getting to the organization within a year, I promise you, within 60 days, they already know that you're not about what you said you were online. They already know, or they're asking it in the interview. To those that's been there 20 plus years, they're just there to cash a check. Do they love their job? If you have no idea, that's a problem. If someone's there more than 20 years and they love their job, they're always advocating and branding the job, then those are the folks you want to talk to. What are we doing that keeps you here every day to make you part of this business, where you see us as being a part of your lifestyle, where you can manage being who you are, but also you can see yourself adding value to this work. So managing expectations. What do we ultimately want from the organization to be like, implement, and exude? That's really kind of where we kind of start that conversation. Then those strategies will actually come forth, looking into how do we get the information from our employees, listening from our employees. You have employee surveys, you have pulse surveys, exit interviews, even things that you do when you're in the onboarding process. You have different ways that you can tap into your audience, which is your employees, to know what's going on. Just because you're asking them to do that, you have to take the time to assess that information and do something about it, and be transparent about that. Because if you're going to ask for my information and I don't see anything coming from that, I'm not going to answer it again, and I'm not going to answer it truthfully if I'm mandated to answer. Then you're going to have a harder time as an HR team to help support the business on where do we need to pivot, where do we need to continue our efforts, or where do we need to add more efforts into what we need to do as an HR team to help support the business. So I'm just going to stop there, because we can definitely talk a long time about this, but I definitely want to leave space for my colleagues to talk about that. But those are the two things that I think that from my perspective, just from my HR background coming into this game for over 20 years, you have to go by measuring your expectations. What is it that you want to do? And then you can define where your strategies are, because they're not going to be the same. You can't compare yourself to Amazon or Coca-Cola. Every industry is different. Every business is different. So every strategy is not going to work. So it just depends on what that expectation is to really define where you want to go. And there are strategies, but that management team has to be on the same page and willing to put in the work to do so.
Yeah. Thanks, Ashley.
I agree with Ashley too about the whole fluff piece, because there are organizations that present themselves very well, in writing, and they have to be really cognizant when you have a toxic workplace, and they're aware they have a toxic workplace. So what do you do to address that toxic the toxic culture that you currently have? So really identifying those drivers that are leading to creating that culture, whether it's stress related, that you're creating individuals that are, that are really leading through micromanagement, over obsession about numbers and data, that is really not focused on the true work at hand. So just realizing and being very realistic about, yes, we have a toxic culture. These are some of the things that we should do to address that. We definitely need to get feedback from our employees on where we are and what we can do to improve it. And hey, here's a plan, and we want your feedback on how we move the plan. And I agree with Ashley, the transparency is key. If you ask employees for feedback and you do absolutely nothing, they will not participate in future surveys or whatever you collect. It will just be data on a paper that has no meaning. So it's really important as you're building initiatives. It's just not a nice to have, or it just looks good on paper or your website, that it is truly something that you're building to support the well-being of your employee and also for the culture.
Thanks, Angela.
I love what Angelique and Ashley said, and I would add, if you're doing a survey, I'm gonna be a little more crass. If you're doing a survey and not doing anything with it, you're actually just gonna piss everyone off. So just don't even do one then. It's actually worse to do a survey and do nothing than to do no survey at all. But I want to take a slightly different turn in the conversation around resilience, because I think we get the term resilience wrong when we talk about it at work. And I think we talk about resilience a lot in what I'm personally calling, I don't know if anyone else calls it this, but I'm calling it toxic resilience. And this idea, when we talk about resilience at work, we're talking about just dealing with all of the crap no matter what. And that's not actually what resilience is. So resilience is a psychological term. Melissa probably can school me on this with her background, but resilience is a psychology term, and it is about when our body, our minds, our person experience stress and how we're able to cope with it. And we build resilience by experiencing manageable or positive stress. And it is that idea, that understanding, okay, we have a challenge, we have something we need to overcome. It's kind of think about those stretch assignments at work, where there's something where we're stretching ourselves and moving forward, but it is something we can accomplish and move forward. I think instead, toxic resilience becomes this like, we'll just deal with it. Be resilient. And that actually isn't giving people space for resilience. When we constantly overload someone with stress, it can become something called toxic stress. And toxic stress creates trauma. Not to get overly technical, but when you are in a traumatized state, your body literally cannot be resilient. It cannot respond in a way other than your body deciding, this is how I'm going to respond for my own survival. So I think it's really important to make this distinction, because we use terms like resilience and grit as almost like a guilting or shaming employees to just like, oh, it'll be fine, like just get in there and figure it out. And the truth is, yes, we should challenge and grow folks and give them opportunities to be positively stressed. But when we're constantly overwhelming folks with stress, we cannot possibly expect them to be resilient, because we are not creating an environment for resilience.
Thanks, Stephanie, because that's probably where I was going to go next. How do we address high stress environments? And high stress environments, I think we've already mentioned, like construction, you've mentioned, the military, I've mentioned, healthcare, even tech, all can be high stress environments and pose unique mental health challenges. So, and I think really effective programs are needed to address these sort of challenges. So I'll come firstly, since you used a name, Melissa. Can you provide some examples or initiatives or programs that have been that you've seen that are effective for dealing with high stress environments?
Yeah, I think it's really important that, again, this comes from the top down, but with managers really taking a very, very, very hard approach with this, with doing workload and task management. And what I mean by that is we need to make sure that the workload is not at a completely unmanageable level. We know that we have very high, often external customer needs, but not at the expense of the employee. So how does that really tactically work, right? It's the manager constantly looking at the project plan. It's constantly checking in with the employee. There could be supportive check-ins that they actually have discussions that are set up to make sure. So how are we doing so far with this? If this is taking too long, maybe we can get somebody else involved. Or you've been working 18-hour days for 4 days in a row, so you need to now not work another 18-hour day. Like, now we need to have somebody looking out for their awareness. And I think that it's just important that breaks are managed into this process. So people are used to having this project plan for deliverables, but we also need to have, are we going to have this be sustainable for somebody that's a human being to be able to do it? And I think that's part of where we have this culture starting, and manager awareness and coworker awareness, right? To get that going. So I think that's important. And then again, we go with the supportive environment, right? We have to practice what we're preaching. If we say you're joining a team or you're joining an organization, that we have work-life balance and that we're supporting employees to be able to have life outside of it and be a whole person, then we have to make sure we're allowing that to do that. And again, you had mentioned these very high throttle environments that a lot of our employees work in. We want to retain those people. We're going to have to make sure that we're keeping them healthy and happy.
Yeah, I think the overwork thing is something you brought up, and that's probably where I wanted to go next as well. Like burnout and overwork are really significant sort of issues, I think, that happen in those environments and many other environments. And so I guess my next question then, and I'll come to Stephanie on this one, is what are some effective strategies for preventing this overwork, burnout among employees? What are your ideas on that?
Absolutely. I'll try and keep it with my simple strategy this morning. We'll see if I can do it. I really think that, number one, clarity is kindness. I'm a big believer in that. As leaders, as managers, being crystal clear in expectations and how someone will be evaluated or rated is so important, especially in our current environment where folks are, getting nervous. There are industries that are still conducting layoffs. So I think that clarity and really understanding how you're measuring someone, what the key aspects are super important and are really helpful as it relates to avoiding overwork and burnout. So you can help people be as focused as possible on the things that matter most. I'm also a big believer, if you can, ask your team what they would like to stop doing or what they should stop doing, like what is not a good use of their time. I think that that's a powerful tool that is often underused, and it's free. So, those are always the best. I will also go back to something I said earlier in saying that, creating a culture where it's very clear that everyone has mental health and proactively talking about mental health for everyone in a proactive manner, talking about self-care. I know I'm not talking about massage and green juice. I'm talking about exercise, boundaries, social connection, all of those things. Having those conversations and creating resources so folks know that it's important for them to invest in themselves and providing resources to do so, so we are not getting to that point of burnout. I also think, my colleagues have all talked about it, but education is really important here, and really educating your teams, especially your leaders, in the signs of burnout and what to look for in themselves and their teams.
Thanks, Stephanie. That was very thorough. Good answer, as always. Anyone else want to add on to that?
Yeah, I would say too, as leaders, to eliminate the use of we always often tell individuals, hustle, that whole grind mentality is like that should be eliminated. People are not trained to be robotic in terms of the work, so there is a stopping point. So interjecting and trying to discover whether or not that person, as I talk about capacity, are they at capacity of the work? As a leader, we have to be able to assess where your staff is in terms of the work. And when they've overextended themselves, but instead of doing so to help to support managing the work, there's additional tasks that are added. So, yes, definitely eliminating that whole hustle mentality for your teams and working extended hours, giving badges of honors for individuals who work through the weekend and work through the midnight. No, that is not acceptable. That is not a balance for someone's well-being. So we definitely have to focus on their whole person and their whole self and see how we can really manage the work without having to overextend them and also facing burnout and challenges.
I'm wondering, I think, like we've spoken about leaders a lot. I think peer support approaches, peer support networks can provide just the way that the teams can work together, emotional and practical support for each other. And I'll come back to you, Stephanie. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on how organizations can actually help facilitate that sort of arrangements in place for peer support?
Yeah,
You know,
I think with peer support, it is, again, it's one of those things that seems hard, but it doesn't have to be so hard. I think, an amazing example that is already ongoing in a lot of larger organizations are ERGs. Again, I think this is a beautiful intersection and partnership between DEI and mental health initiatives. A lot of companies are not big enough for ERGs. I understand that. It's, if you just have one person in your ERG, and not really creating a sense of community or peer support. Think about places in your employee journey is something that I always speak to when I talk about building community or peer support in trauma-informed workplaces. Onboarding, new manager training, specific transitions in the employee journey, specific types of work, and create, again, space for connection. Do not try and force connection, but create space for connection. And, if you're a smaller team, maybe it's, in the last 6 months, you've joined our organization, and we're going to have a special cohort to, create that sense of connection, that experience. I have mixed opinions on mentorship programs. We won't dive into that deep hole because I want to make sure we have plenty of time. But I also think mentorship programs and pairing and matching employees can be helpful in this way as well. But again, think about the things you're already doing that are already part of the employee journey or life cycle. And then think about how can we create space for connection as part of that.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephanie. And I just noticed at the time when I got 3 minutes left, so I guess we'll come to the last question, which is we'll just go around our virtual room and everyone wants to share one key takeaway or actionable advice to help connect the dots between wellbeing, mental health, and employee experience. And we'll go Angelique first. We'll just go around the room again.
That's a good question. So one key takeaway that I will give to the audience is just place your employees at the center of everything that you do. Focus on their well-being, see how it actually connects to the current work that you have, your values, your mission, your vision. They are at the center, they are the heart of the organization, and ensuring that they are the priority as you're establishing all of these initiatives. So that's what I would leave.
And I'm going to kind of benchmark with Angelique and say, by doing that, make sure that you are having your leadership subscribe in the same way. So keeping them true to the policies and the culture and what they're leading by and what they're showing, and having that consistency threaded and woven out through all of the things that the organization is doing. And to the fluff comment, no fluff, action only.
Thanks, Melissa. Ashley.
The takeaway would be a little bit different than what Stephanie gave in her last remarks. Open the space up for employee resource groups or affinity groups. Even if you have just one person, add that one person to bring in other people to the table to create an inclusion council. You can do it. Don't allow that one voice to just go unheard, because that's where you can embed them into the great things that Stephanie shared in her last remarks. You can embed that inclusion group to really kind of give you an eye on the gaps that you have and some solutions to really how are you being authentic as a company to strive in the culture, to build that culture that you ultimately want. So I would say employee resource groups are honestly the way to go, because they definitely will help you with that blueprint.
Thanks, Ashley. And Stephanie.
Love that. I think, there's just so much here to take away. I think don't be afraid of having to be perfect when it comes to supporting your employees, your team members. Know that caring and asking and taking an interest, listening. I think, Rod, you put that forward, and it's a great point. I think that's important, and know that is impactful, and worry less about perfection. And then I would also add, mental health is about your day-to-day experience in the workplace. It is not about an initiative or program. It is about what your team experiences every day. So keep that in mind.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I'd like to thank all the panelists. So thank you, Angelique, Melissa, Ashley, and Stephanie. It's been a really great conversation, and a conversation that certainly needs to happen. And it's just clear that the connection between mental health, wellbeing, employee experience is really crucial for really having a productive workplace. So thank you today, and look forward to future conversations, and thanks to the audience for joining in, and everyone have a great rest of the day. So thank you, and bye.